At the hearing, my daughter accused me of kidnapping my grandson. I looked at the boy I'd raised for 12 years and thought, how can a mother just walk away from her child for a weekend, only to come back when she found out how much money was involved? You won't believe what happened when the judge read the sentence. But before we get to that, I need to tell you how it all started. Because sometimes, the one who truly loves a child isn't the one who's supposed to. Before we keep going, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far around the world our story is reaching. My name is George McAllister. I'm 71 years old, and before I retired, I worked as a railroad mechanic here in Fargo, North Dakota. The last time I saw a genuine look on my daughter Jane's face was one September evening. She pulled up in a rental car, carrying a blue suitcase and holding little Caleb's hand. 5 years old, a stuffed dinosaur, and a backpack on his shoulders. Dad, can I leave him with you for the weekend? I just need to sort some things out. I looked at that kid and said yes. At the time, I had no idea I was making the most important decision of my life. She didn't come back on Monday, or Friday, or at the end of the next month. 3 weeks later, she finally picked up the phone and said she needed more time. Her voice sounded like she was living in another world, far away from everything that really mattered. That's when I made myself a promise. That boy would never be treated like a burden again. No matter what it took, no matter what I had to do, he'd have a real home. He'd have love, care, and attention. He'd have a future, and I'd make sure of it, no matter the cost. Melanie, my wife, didn't say a word for days after realizing Jane wasn't coming back. She walked through the house, looking at the scattered toys, the extra bed we'd set up in the guest room, the tiny clothes hanging on the line, the drawings stuck to the fridge. Then, one random morning, she went to the bank in Fargo without telling me her plans. We started saving every penny we could after that, cutting every non-essential expense. If Jane wasn't coming back, we were going to pave the way for him, with a safe roof, a good school, and the future he deserved. Melanie's always been wiser than me, and she already knew that her daughter's abandonment was final. That first Christmas we spent together, Caleb asked if his mom was coming for dinner. I told him maybe, but deep down, I already knew the answer. By the second Christmas, he didn't even ask anymore. He just helped Melanie decorate the tree like it had always been that way. That's when I realized something that still hurts to this day. That so-called weekend was just a nice-sounding excuse. Jane had really left, and there was never a plan to come back. She had simply decided she didn't want to be a mom, at least not at that point in her life. And I had to accept that reality, no matter how painful it was for all of us. But you know what happens when an old man decides to raise a child who's been left behind? I enrolled him in the local school as his legal guardian, took him to every doctor's appointment, showed up at every parent-teacher meeting. After a few months, the teachers stopped asking about his mom, and I stopped bringing her up. Caleb was officially my grandson, but in practice, I'd fully taken on the role of his dad. Every shot, every homework assignment, every feverish night, that was all on me now. It felt strange at first, but then it became as natural as breathing. A grandfather steps up when he has to, and I did it without thinking twice. We adapted, built routines, became a real family, even without any official paperwork. But life had other plans for us. 2 years after she walked out, Melanie got the diagnosis that changed everything for our little family. Advanced stage breast cancer, with slim chances of recovery. She knew she wouldn't be around to watch Caleb grow up, wouldn't see him graduate, land his first job. That's when she made a decision that caught me off guard. She opened a college fund in his name, right there at the bank in Fargo. The first deposit was $2,000 from our savings, money we'd set aside for emergencies. Until her last day, she kept putting money into that account religiously, even when she was too weak to leave the house. The night she passed, I held her hand and promised, "I'll keep putting money in that account. He's going to have the future he deserves." She squeezed my hand one last time. I had no idea that promise would change everything years later. The years passed by like a movie in slow motion, and I watched Caleb grow up right before my eyes. Stubborn like his mom was as a kid, but gentle like his grandma Melanie always was. The workshop in Fargo became our world, our safe haven, the place where we built a real life. He'd help out on weekends, learning how to handle tools, figuring out how things worked. It was wild to think that the same little boy who'd been left behind had become my everyday companion. Folks in town already treated him like my son, not my grandson. And honestly, that's exactly how I felt too. But you won't believe who decided to show up after all that time. Jane popped up 3 times over the course of 12 whole years. Always in a rush, always with some excuse ready to go. She'd show up driving a different car each time, wearing expensive clothes, talking about big-deal jobs in Minneapolis. She'd bring toys Caleb had already outgrown, late birthday gifts for parties she never showed up to. She never really wanted to know how he was doing, if he was doing okay in school, if he had friends, if he was happy. The only things she ever asked about were the household expenses, the financial situation, whether I was managing responsibilities properly. Each visit lasted just a few hours, then she'd disappear for years again. I started to notice a strange pattern in her visits. The education fund Melanie had started kept growing, little by little. 2,000 here, 1,500 there, whenever we had anything left over from our retirement checks. Every single cent I could save went straight into that account at the bank in Fargo. Caleb didn't even know it existed. It was a surprise we were saving for his 18th birthday. Everything was documented, officially registered, totally legal. Melanie would have been proud to see how that money had multiplied over the years. It was our way of making sure he had real options in life, that he could go to school wherever he wanted. Nothing over the top, but enough to give a young man some independence. At least that's what I believed back then. By the time Caleb turned 16, the fund had grown to $386,000. More than I ever imagined saving in a lifetime. Every deposit was accounted for. Every penny had a clear source. Retirement checks, extra work, sales from old parts at the shop. It was clean, it was honest, it was ours. The boy was growing up, becoming more independent, starting to make plans for college. It felt like we had finally built something solid, a stable foundation for his future. I was proud of what we'd achieved together. But life has its own way of turning everything upside down. Jane showed up again just a few months before Caleb's 18th birthday. This time was different. She didn't just swing by, she lingered in town for days. Said she was living in Minneapolis, in a fancy condo, working in legal marketing for some big firm. She spoke differently, dressed differently, seemed like a completely new person. She asked about Caleb's school, his plans, his college options. For the first time in years, she actually seemed genuinely interested in her son. I even let myself believe maybe she had grown up. Maybe she finally wanted to be a real mom. I couldn't have been more wrong. You won't believe what she did next. It was from Minneapolis that the legal notice came. The one that turned our lives upside down. Jane was suing me, accusing me of kidnapping and parental alienation. She claimed I'd kept her from seeing her son, manipulated the situation to shut her out of his life. But what shocked me the most was finding out she didn't just want custody of Caleb. She wanted full control of the education fund, every dollar Melanie and I had saved, penny by penny. Her financial motives were crystal clear, laid out in black and white with no shame. A daughter who abandoned her own child and only came back when she found out there was money on the table. That's when I realized this battle was going to be way uglier than I'd ever imagined. The initial shock wore off, but the weight of those papers hit me hard. I went straight to the library, the room in the house where I kept all the important files, photos of Melanie, the drawings Caleb made at school. That room held the story of our last 12 years. Report cards, medical receipts, vaccination records, photos from the first time he rode a bike. Every document was proof that I had been there for all the moments that mattered. But would that be enough to convince a judge? Have you ever had to prove in court that you love someone? I called a lawyer that someone from the shop had recommended. I ended up getting help from a legal clinic at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. Law students offering help for cases like mine at rates I could afford. The first question they asked hit hard. "Mr. McAllister, do you have any written proof of maternal abandonment?" I swallowed hard and said, "All I have are receipts." And years of being there. On the other end of the line, silence stretched out like forever. It felt like my whole life had to fit into one filing cabinet. The hearing was scheduled for 15 days later. Caleb was torn when he found out. Can you imagine what must have been going through the mind of a 17-year-old? Grandpa, I just wish she really loved me. But I trust you more than anyone. I put my hand on his shoulder and told him, you don't have to choose between love and loyalty, son. You just have to choose what's right. But inside, I was terrified, scared to death of what might happen. How do you explain to a judge that love doesn't need a birth certificate to be real? Time was moving too fast, and I still didn't know how to win this fight. Digging through Melanie's old emails, I found a message she had sent to her sister years ago. It said, if anything happens to me, George will protect Caleb. That fund is just for the boy, to secure his future. It was touching, showing her intentions clear as day. But the lawyer told me straight up, that's emotionally powerful, but it doesn't carry much legal weight. Another blow to my hopes that this would be easy to sort out. It felt like the system didn't understand that the most important things in life don't fit into signed contracts. I needed something more concrete, more official, more convincing for those judges. 3 days before the hearing, I got a piece of information that changed everything. First, Dakota Bank issued a full statement of the education fund. $386,000 saved over the years. Every deposit was made by either me or Melanie, but the beneficiary was always Caleb. The problem? Jane was still listed as co-administrator, a right she was trying to reactivate through the courts. That's what she was really after, not her son's love. The clock was ticking, and I still didn't know how to prove that this money was saved out of genuine love. Only 72 hours left until the hearing that would decide our fate. I spent the next several hours putting everything together with the help of a legal clinic intern. Full school records, proof of medical appointments, birthday photos, receipts for medications over the years. Every piece of paper told a story. Every document proved I had been there when she wasn't. The boy had a full medical history, excellent grades, friends at school, teachers who knew him well. It was a life built brick by brick, day by day, with dedication and love. But would that be enough to convince someone who saw us as just case numbers? The paperwork was ready, but my heart was still in pieces from the nerves. The night before the hearing, I came downstairs to get a glass of water and found Caleb in the kitchen. He was leaning on the counter, staring out the window at Fargo's empty street, lost in thought. I can't sleep, he said without looking at me, his voice heavy with worry. Me neither, I replied, pulling out a chair next to him to keep him company. The house was quiet, with only the ticking of the wall clock marking the hours we had left. Our whole life was about to change forever, and we both knew it. It felt like we were standing on the eve of a war we never asked for. Grandpa, if tomorrow she manages to turn everything against you, he started to say, but stopped halfway. What do you mean, son? I asked, already bracing for an answer that would hit me deep. If she takes me away from here, you know I'll still be on your side, right? Always. Those words gave me more strength than any lawyer ever could in that desperate moment. That right there was the only proof that really mattered. The heart of that boy knew who had truly been a father. He knew who'd been there through all those years, who got up in the middle of the night when he had a fever. No one could ever take that from us, no matter what happened in court. By the time the sun came up, I was already up, ironing my best dress shirt. I'd picked out a blue tie that Melanie had given me on her last birthday before she passed. It wasn't superstition. I just wanted to carry a piece of her with me for such an important moment. Caleb came downstairs wearing the outfit he usually wore to church, hair combed, looking serious like a grown man. "Ready, Grandpa?" he asked. I answered, "We were born ready for this, son." The promise I'd made years ago, that he'd never again be treated like a burden, was about to be tested. It was time to prove that family isn't about blood, it's about presence. The drive to Minneapolis took 2 long hours, and we spent most of the trip in respectful silence. Caleb stared out the window at the passing landscape, while I focused on the road and the arguments I'd rehearsed in my head. We arrived at the courthouse an hour early, carrying a folder full of documents and 12 years' worth of memories. The clinic's lawyer was waiting for us at the entrance, a serious young man with glasses who seemed to understand the weight of the moment. He greeted Caleb with respect, like he knew the boy was at the heart of everything. To him, we weren't just another case in a stack of files. "Mr. McAllister, remember, always tell the truth. Be direct. Don't let the accusations get to you, he advised me as we climbed the courthouse steps. And Caleb, you can choose whether or not to speak during the hearing. No one will make you do anything you don't want to. Caleb nodded, but I could see the nerves in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. We were just a grandfather and grandson from a small town, walking into a big courtroom to fight. We were up against someone who had learned how to use the system in her favor, who knew all the right words and legal arguments. But we had something she didn't: the truth on our side. In the last few minutes before stepping into the courtroom, I looked at Caleb and saw the man he was becoming. Strong, loyal, determined, even with fear written all over his young face. Despite all the pressure, he stood there beside me, ready to face whatever was coming. No matter what happens in there, I said quietly, holding his arm, you'll always be my grandson. No piece of paper can change that, you hear me? He smiled for the first time that day. A small but genuine smile. It was time to show that courtroom what a real family looked like. One built with love and dedication. The courtroom door was right in front of us, and on the other side was our future. The courtroom door opened, and my heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Jane was already seated on the other side, next to a lawyer in an expensive suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase. She looked at Caleb with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, too forced to be real. Then she gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Was it defiance, fear, determination? Judge Christine Thatcher entered, and everyone stood automatically in solemn respect. In that moment, years of dedication and sacrifice were about to be judged by someone who didn't know us. May God help us, because we needed all the help we could get in that courtroom battle. The hearing began with Jane confidently seated across the room, cream blazer, light makeup, looking like a businesswoman who owned the space. Her lawyer was young and articulate, the type molded by expensive universities and skilled at saying all the right things. I felt small there, a retired mechanic from Fargo trying to explain many years of love to people who only spoke legal language. Caleb sat beside me, nervous but steady, holding a folder with all our documents. The judge observed everything with that professional neutrality seasoned officials learn to master. Our entire life rested in the hands of a woman who didn't know us. When Her Honor called me to present my defense, I stood slowly, holding a printed copy of Melanie's email. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice came out steady. If anything happens, the fund is for him. I paused on purpose, looked straight at the judge, then at Jane. The rest, I'd rather discuss with someone impartial. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the tension in the air, as if everyone knew there was a lot more behind those words. Jane shifted in her seat, and for the first time, I saw something that looked like fear in her eyes. Jane asked to speak and said she wanted to rebuild the relationship with the son she had abandoned. Her voice sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced in front of the mirror for weeks. She spoke about restructuring the maternal bond, like family was some corporation in need of a reorg. She claimed she'd been misunderstood all these years, that circumstances had prevented her from being present. Now that she was in a better place, she said she just wanted to protect her son's financial future. Every word rang hollow to me, but I wasn't sure if the others could tell. Could the judge see through all that performance? Jane's lawyer didn't beat around the bush. This emotionally sourced amount is being mismanaged by someone without proper financial qualifications, he said, gesturing toward me. Ms. McAllister wishes to restructure these funds in the child's favor, under qualified professional management. The words hit me like bricks. All these years of hard work reduced to mismanagement. It was becoming more and more obvious. This wasn't about affection or maternal love. It was about the $386,000 that could mean the difference between a comfortable life and an ordinary one. The judge began asking technical questions about the fund, about documentation, about the source of each dollar. I explained everything calmly. Retirement checks, extra jobs at the shop, sales of old parts, savings from both me and Melanie. Every deposit had a paper trail, every source was clean and honest. Jane stayed silent, just watching, like she was doing mental math. Her lawyer kept jotting things down, searching for holes in my story. But there weren't any holes. That money was saved with sweat, tears, and love for a boy who deserved to have real choices in life. Things got even more tense when the judge asked if Caleb wanted to speak. The boy stood up slowly, his hands trembling a little, but when he began talking, his voice came out firm and clear, full of a maturity that caught me off guard. I still love my mom," he said, looking Jane straight in the eyes. "But she left, and the one who stayed was my grandpa." The room went completely silent, like everyone was holding their breath. He swallowed hard, gathering the courage to go on. In that moment, I knew he was speaking his truth. When I was sick, when it was my birthday, when I passed my physics test, he was the one who was there. Caleb continued, his voice growing stronger. Jane lowered her head, maybe feeling the weight of those devastating words. "It was my grandpa who took me to the doctor when I broke my arm. He's the one who stayed up with me when I had a fever. He's the one who helped me with homework every night." Each sentence was like a dagger to the conscience of anyone listening. The boy wasn't being dramatic. He was stating facts, telling his life story. And those facts spoke louder than any legal argument. "If she wants to come back now, that's okay. I'd really like that. I mean it," Caleb said, turning back to his mom. "But not with paperwork. And not because of the fund." Those words echoed through the room like a gunshot. Jane tried to speak, but the judge raised her hand, signaling for silence. Her lawyer scribbled furiously, trying to figure out how to counter what had just been said. But how do you argue with the truth? How do you fight against the sincerity of a boy, simply explaining how he was raised? Everyone knew we'd reached the heart of the custody dispute. The silence that followed stretched into seconds that felt like an eternity. Can you imagine what goes through a mother's mind when her own son confronts her like that? Jane looked visibly shaken, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes avoiding Caleb's. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear, either trying to calm her down or coach her. The judge watched it all with a neutral expression, but I could tell she was taking in every word. The air was thick with the weight of something final approaching. The judge finally broke the silence, but not in the way I expected. "I will carefully review all documents presented and the statements made here today," she said, her voice formal and detached. "This is a complex situation involving not just legal matters, but deep emotional considerations." My heart started pounding. I couldn't read her tone. Both parties have presented valid points, and I must weigh every aspect carefully. She looked at Caleb, then at me, then at Jane. "The ruling will be announced at the next session, scheduled 3 days from now." 3 days. 72 hours to find out whether everything we had fought for would be validated or erased. The judge stood, and we all rose automatically. "This session is adjourned," she said, stepping away from the bench. Jane tried to approach Caleb, but he simply gave a polite nod and walked toward me. Her lawyer looked visibly frustrated, clearly not expecting a teenager to be so composed and articulate. We walked out in silence, but I could feel all eyes on us. Those next 3 days would be the longest of our lives. In the courthouse hallway, Caleb held onto my arm and whispered, "Grandpa, I said what I felt in my heart. No matter what happens, I don't regret it." I looked at the young man I had raised and felt overwhelming pride mixed with gut-wrenching fear. "You were perfect, son. You told the truth, and that's all we could do." Jane passed us with her lawyer, giving us a look that blended sadness with determination. She wasn't giving up. I could see that clearly. The next 3 days would be a silent war of nerves, hope, and fear. The drive back to Fargo was nearly silent. Caleb stared out the window, lost in thoughts I couldn't imagine. I drove on autopilot, my mind spinning through every word said in that courtroom. We had given it our all, told our truth, shown our love. But would that be enough? Could the justice system see past the legal arguments? When we got home, the shop looked smaller, the house quieter. Everything was the same, and yet everything had changed. In 3 days, I would find out if I could still be the man who raised that boy. 3 days later, we returned to the same courtroom, but this time the atmosphere felt final, charged with tension. Jane was there again, but she seemed smaller, less confident than during the first hearing. Her lawyer nervously flipped through papers like he knew things hadn't gone according to plan the first time. Caleb was beside me, calmer than I was, carrying that peace that only comes from speaking your truth. The judge entered right on time, holding the folder that would define our fate forever. This was the moment I had feared and longed for the most, to finally find out whether 12 years of love meant more than blood. Her Honor took her seat and arranged the papers on the desk with precise, deliberate movements. The silence in the room was total, like even the air had stopped moving. She looked at each of us, first at me, then at Caleb, and finally at Jane. My heart pounded as she opened the folder and began reading. I felt Caleb's hand reach for mine under the table, his fingers cold with nerves. Jane straightened in her seat, and her lawyer stopped fiddling with the documents. This was it, the moment of truth. The judge read the ruling with authority, each word landing like a hammer on our future. This court recognizes the de facto parenthood exercised by George McAllister, resident of Fargo, North Dakota. The first words hit me like a wave of relief so strong I almost collapsed in my chair. Years of love, commitment, and sacrifice were being officially acknowledged by the court. Caleb squeezed my hand tighter, and I could feel tears threatening to escape. Jane slightly bowed her head, maybe finally feeling the weight of all the years she'd been absent in that boy's life. The judge continued reading, this time looking straight at Jane with an expression that blended seriousness with subtle reproach. The educational fund, established by the late Mrs. Melanie McAllister, remains fully designated for Caleb James McAllister, without third-party interference. Jane tried to stand, probably to object or plead once more. Her lawyer made a move to speak, but the judge raised her hand with authority. It was clear she hadn't finished reading, and no interruptions would be tolerated in this solemn moment. Silence returned to the room instantly. The judge lowered the papers slightly and looked directly at Jane, as if to ensure every word would be heard and understood. The attempt to reverse custody on the brink of adulthood, under financial grounds, is hereby dismissed. Those words were devastating to Jane's case, making it clear the court had seen through the real motivation behind the custody battle. This wasn't about maternal love or longing. It was about money, plain and simple. The financial interest had been exposed and rejected, definitively and without question. I looked at Caleb and saw silent tears streaming down his face. But they weren't tears of sadness. Caleb cried without a sound, tears of relief, of gratitude, maybe even of forgiveness for everything we'd endured. Jane stared at the floor, unable to meet her son's eyes or anyone else's in that room. Her lawyer snapped his folder shut, clearly defeated, likely frustrated to have lost a case that once seemed like a sure win. The air in the room felt like closure, like a painful chapter of our lives had finally come to an end. The judge continued reading the final part of the ruling, her voice steady, formal, and final. As of July 19th, Caleb McAllister will have unrestricted access to the fund and, as a legal adult, will decide his own autonomy. That date, July 19th, was etched in my mind as the day my grandson would officially become a free man. Free from manipulation, free from others' financial interests, free to choose his own path in life. It was the gift Melanie and I had always dreamed of giving him, the freedom to decide who he wanted to be. The session ended with the usual courtroom formalities, but the emotional weight of that moment was immense. We walked out in silence, both of us still processing everything that had just happened. Jane tried to approach us one last time but gave up when she saw neither Caleb nor I move toward her. In the hallway, away from lawyers and strangers, Caleb finally spoke. He stopped, looked me straight in the eye, and said something so simple it cut straight through me. She left. You stayed. Those 5 words summed up 12 years better than any legal decision ever could. We walked to the parking lot together, father and son at heart, now officially recognized by the American justice system. The sun was shining in Minneapolis, and for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. We hadn't just won a legal battle, we had proven something much bigger. That family is built on presence, dedication, and unconditional love. The education fund would continue to grow until July, when Caleb would decide his future with full independence. Jane hadn't just lost the case. She'd lost the chance to know the extraordinary man her son was becoming. On the drive back to Fargo, we talked about future plans for the first time in a long while. Caleb wanted to study engineering, maybe at the University of North Dakota, using the fund that Melanie and I had lovingly built for him. You gave me something she never could, he said, gazing out the car window. You gave me stability. You gave me real love. You gave me a home. I thought of Melanie, how proud she would be to see the boy we raised together turning into such an honest, grounded young man. She had been part of every penny saved, every joyful moment, even if she wasn't here to witness the victorious end of our story. We got home as the sun was setting over Fargo, painting the sky orange and pink. The workshop looked warmer. The house felt more like ours than ever before. Caleb went straight to the phone and called his school friends to share the news of the court victory. I sat in Melanie's old armchair and finally let the emotions pour out. Long years ago, Jane left a child on my doorstep, thinking it would only be for a weekend. Today, that child was officially my responsibility, recognized by the American legal system. The promise I made all those years ago, that he would never again be treated like a burden, had been completely fulfilled. 2 months later, Caleb got his acceptance letter from the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. He opened the envelope right at our kitchen table, where we'd shared breakfast every morning since he was a little kid. "Grandpa, I got in," he shouted, waving the letter in the air like a victory flag. He chose mechanical engineering, following in the footsteps of the old man who raised him. But now with the formal education I never had. With part of the fund Melanie and I had saved over the years, we decided to renovate the shop. It was time to give a fresh face to the place that had been our sanctuary for so long. That boy deserved to start his adult life knowing he'd always have a place to come home to. We put up a wooden sign at the entrance of the garage in Fargo, handcrafted by a local artisan who knew our story. It took 3 weeks to finish, each letter carefully carved by hand with care and precision. Mac's Garage, Estem by Love, it read in strong, elegant lettering. Caleb helped install it, holding the ladder while I screwed it into the brick wall. When we finished, we stood there in silence, just taking it in. This symbol of everything we had built together. That sign wasn't just a name. It was our story in just a few words. Built by love, kept by love, and always growing with love. That Christmas, our first one after winning in court, Jane sent Caleb a message. I was in the kitchen prepping the turkey when I heard the ping of his phone. Caleb looked at the screen, read the message quickly, let out a deep sigh, and deleted it without saying a word to me or anyone else. I didn't ask what it said, and he didn't offer. Some things are better left unsaid, especially during the holidays. That Christmas, we were just a grandfather and a grandson celebrating the love that had bonded us forever. Now we work on cars, trucks, and sometimes people who stop by just to talk about life, about problems, about dreams and hopes. The shop became more than a business. It turned into a gathering place for the Fargo community. Caleb handles estimates with the kind of mathematical precision he learned in school, while I tighten bolts with decades of hands-on engine experience. The garage became a real workshop, and even more than that, a home for 2 men who found each other one September afternoon. Customers come in for a repair and leave with advice on life, family, and relationships. Funny how working on machines teaches you a lot about working with people. Sometimes at the end of the day, when we're closing up and putting tools away, he just stands there looking at the sign. He doesn't say anything, just stares at those words that sum up our entire journey. He stands there, hands in his pockets, with that thoughtful look of someone processing everything we've lived through. I know he's thinking about Melanie, about how proud she would be of the men we've become. Maybe he's thinking about Jane, the woman who was once his mother but chose another path. He doesn't talk about those moments of reflection, and I don't press him. But I understand it all. I understand that sign means more than just the name of a business. It's proof that family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build. I understand that when he looks at those words, he sees all those years of love, effort, sleepless nights, birthday parties, and help with homework. He sees a grandfather who became a father, a boy who was abandoned and grew into a man of character. He sees the victory of love over selfishness, of presence over absence, of commitment over convenience. Est, by love, built by love, kept by love, and destined to keep growing for all the generations that come after us. Now I'm curious about you, the one listening to our story. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever been through something like this? Share it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Meanwhile, I'm leaving one of the channel's favorite stories on the end screen, one that'll definitely surprise you. Thanks for watching.